Whatever. We are live. Hey guys, welcome to our Star Trek Voyager review. Going with this new tradition of me watching almost every Trek show. Started off with Deep Space Nine because I said that show was garbage.
And you were totally wrong.
Totally wrong, yes. And so I decided to move on to Voyager. So with me today discussing the intricacies of Star Trek Voyager is the one and only Mr. Juan Bagnell.
Hey, everybody, let's talk some Trek. I'm stoked. Let's do this.
All right. So took me less time. I actually I didn't watch any TV. Let's just put it that way. I did not watch any TV, any other show. I cranked out Voyager. And if I were to put it in categories, since I've now watched every single Star Trek, I would say it is my second least favorite Star Trek show. My least favorite show is Enterprise.
Okay.
Voyager would be my second least favorite.
So then what comes after Voyager?
I would actually say, it's be unfair to put Enterprise there just because I just watched Deep Space Nine. For me, the original is always on top. I just love the quirkiness, of that original show. So I'll put that as almost like that's a 1, and then Enterprise and Deep Space Nine kind of battled it for that, 2A and 2B spot type of thing. But then again, I just watched Enterprise. I just watched Deep Space Nine. So
right. So here's my list. My list at the bottom is Enterprise, then Voyager, then Deep Space Nine, then the original Trek, and then Next Generation is at the top.
Okay. No, I feel people who don't like the first show. I just liked it. For me, it was just one of those.
I love the original Trek. It's just, especially when I was a kid, you would watch the original Trek in like reruns, but then Next Generation came out and it was new and it was exciting and it was fresh. Yeah. And that was the Trek that kind of informed my love of the Star Trek universe. Even though I love the original Trek, I have to put Next Gen just a little ahead of the original series.
Oh no, definitely. I hear you. Now going on to Voyager itself. So 7 seasons of Voyager. Now, if you know anything about Star Trek Voyager, spoiler, doesn't matter. It came out forever. The show basically takes on the premise. It starts off in between Deep Space Nine, the war between the Cardassians and the Maquis, and Voyager is this newly commissioned ship that's sent out to go capture some key Maquis people in the Badlands. It's kind of like this area in space that has some very bad, I will call it atmospheric, but it's like spatial turbulence, so to speak, you want to call it. So they get there and somehow they're sucked into the Delta Quadrant, which is another quadrant of space that they have no one in the Alpha Quadrant has ventured to, at least in known history. That should make for a very good show. I mean, just that premise alone where you're stuck and you have to find your way home, it make for a very good show. It has the trappings for that. And that's where it hits almost its height to a certain degree of what Voyager could be, because I got little episodes here and there where I was like, oh, and then I just was brought back down again.
Well, I mean, describe what you mean by that, because I mean, I think Voyager is one of those shows that people emotionally have very different reactions to. And
so I'll put it this. I think the simplest way it is when Voyager attempted to do little story arcs of like part 1 and part 2 episodes. Sometimes even maybe 3 or 4 into the next season, that's when they were able to get some rhythm where they start off a storyline. So for instance, I can't remember the storyline specifically, but there was one storyline where you talked about our ancestors, how dinosaurs evolved and left the planet, and they were these other sets of reptilian creatures in the Delta Quadrant. Now that was only 1 episode. I think it was 2 episodes, but that should have been more. That was it was begging for like 4 or 5 episode little mini story arc to say, you know what, we found something that no one else back home knows, and we can now change the way history of humanity is being told. And it was done so briefly and then so forgotten, considering these guys had better technology than they had.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is also they had this annoying ruse of, oh, here's the technology that can take you home. Here's another technology that can take you home. And you're like, okay. And then some techno mumbo jumbo comes in and then it can't work. And I'm like,
I think instantly the premise of Star Trek Voyager runs into some problems because it's essentially Lost in Space.
Yeah.
You know, if you've ever watched that original TV show Lost in Space, or if you've seen the not so great movie associated with the same name.
Yeah.
So we have something really unique with Voyager that could have been very interesting if the showrunners had a solid end game in place. So imagine if the people who had been behind Star Trek Voyager had said, hey, we've got a 5-year plan. This is where they're going to be at the end of year 1, at the end of year 2, at the end of year 3, and then they'll be home at year 4. I mean, year 5. Not that they tell us that, but that if the showrunners had that sense, and you really got that, they were trying to create drama by introducing, here's a magical technology. We can break the warp 10 barrier, and we can be home in days. Oh no, it might kill some pygmy butterflies, so we can't use it. Wah, wah. And so we had way too many episodes that fit that format, that storyline, that arc.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree with you, because one of the things there was only one episode they actually did that very well, where I was getting tired of it too, where they went, what's his name? Paris, Lieutenant Paris, the
pilot.
Yeah, he had worked on a transwarp technology, and when he actually used it, it started like changing his physiology. So they knew, okay, we can't do this. It's just not going to work, which is fine. Where you're like, we built it, we tested it. All right, let's just shelve this for now because this is not going to work. But then they decided to add it where he now basically deforms from a human to some kind of reptile. And they said that's the evolution of human. I was like, okay, if evolution says we came from that, then why are we going back there?
Right. Or that's what we would evolve into. I mean, again, in playing with what we understand in the Star Trek universe, they had walked away from just crazy technological magic like that. But Voyager brought it all crashing back with this preponderance of technobabble, where even if the episode wasn't hinged on whether or not they could get home, that, you know, problem introduced in the first act. Second act, oh no, we're all struggling. Third act, well, if we just decouple the phase variants, we can blah, 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 blah. Well, why didn't you do that 45 minutes ago? Because it would have been an episode if that had been an issue.
The best thing a starship has now, the best weapon any starship has is not your photon torpedoes. It's not your phaser banks. It's the deflector array.
Right.
What you do with the deflector array, transferring power, remodulating, putting a tachyon pulse in there. I was like, my God. I mean,
yeah, it was the deflector array for Star Trek Voyager was like reversing the flow of the what is it? There's reversing the polarity of the neutron flow or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
where it's just a nonsensical term for a magic device that can kind of do whatever they think they want, and then they always have to have like the silly metaphor. Well, if we add a tachyon pulse to the deflector array, it would be like overinflating a balloon. You're like, no, it's not going to be like that. That's not no one in the 24th century is going to try and relate things down to some lowest common denominator.
Speaking of that, so remember how, I don't know if you remember when they had episodes where there was a captain from a time ship in the 29th century. So it seemed like everything in the 29th century was all about time travel.
Yeah.
And he comes back to say, look, Voyager, we have to destroy you because you fucked up the timeline. And then they go back in time and they're stuck in the 80s. And this guy in the 80s is basically beating them the whole way. First of all, he somehow sets up holographic emitters in his office. Fine, he probably took it from the ship. No problem. But he was able to rig it to his 1980s PC.
Well, I mean, all computers are just computers, right?
Yeah. And then this is the part that because this is an ongoing thread throughout Voyager. And then they're trying to beam the doctor out of there, right? Because the doctor's there with his mobile emitter and he traps him in there. And Harry Kim's like, Captain's like, beam it out. I'm trying the captain. Somehow he's blocking it. And luckily she's like, how? The way she said how is like, he has 1980s tech. And I'm sitting out there going, yeah, explain this to me.
Right.
How? And
in a way that won't completely insult my intelligence as an audience.
He steals the doctor, and he steals half of the data banks. Mind you, they run with gigaquad. So basically, it's huge amounts of data. I don't know where he stored it. Granted, this guy was, like Bill Gates or something, right? And
he probably had really fast Wi-Fi, man. It's cool.
So he steals it, and I'm going, this is ridiculous. And that was an ongoing thread where some alien, right, comes on the ship, maybe like pretends or lies and tries to steal something. And then he goes to some console. I swear to God, he's not like he went to the command center. He goes to some console next to sickbay or even the mess hall. And he's tapping into the system. And then Harry Keegan goes, Tuvok goes, oh, somebody's tapping into our system. Okay, fine. You get a red alert, right? And she goes, Harry, stop that. I can't, Captain. I've been blocked out. I'm like, why?
Well, and again, I think it just comes down to what one of the greatest problems with Voyager was sort of a lack of focus. And so they didn't know what to do with a ship that was lost in space and too far away from Federation territory. And it only took a season before we were basically just reintroducing characters and species that we were already familiar with, and all of these really like hackneyed, oh, well, we'll go home. Oh, no, now we're in the 80s. That's not going home. We never got to that point where the show found its footing and could exist on its own terms. It was sort of tied to a greater world of Trek, where those stories seemed to be locked in step with the things that we had already covered in Deep Space Nine and in Next Generation. Yeah. And it was really disappointing because there was a lot of potential there to do something interesting with an adventure serial, but you can't do that. I mean, like what we've learned since Voyager is the notion of really clear-cut, defined season-long arcs. So if you could imagine the kind of care and attention to detail for storytelling that we had from something like The Walking Dead, where whether or not you like the show, we can at least say, they have a very clear concept. They don't always know exactly how they're going to get to the end of the season, but they kind of know where they're going to kick off, and they really have a focus on where they want to end up. And over the course of the season, we have little adventures that take us along that way. If Voyager ever had that kind of focus, I think we would have had a completely different style of show. I think it would have been a much smarter show, and I think it would have had less of these, because they're like every season, half of every season is basically episodes that we're describing right now.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree.
That doesn't make any sense. It's incomprehensible. That defies the rules that you set up from the season before. That's just dumb.
Okay, all right. To give you one that really like blew my mind, and this went from like a season 4 to season 5. So Kes, she was a Compa character who had mental abilities. Tuvok was training her. Now we'll get to characters also, because I think that was the also other problem with the show, because they didn't have the solid core of characters. Some characters were good, some characters were not so good. They didn't have that, core that you had with Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Next Generation, where even if you had terrible episodes, but because some of those episodes were about the character arcs, you were still, tied into those episodes themselves. But there was this one episode about Kes. So Kes is an Ocampa, and she can only grow. They die at the age of 9. But by 9, they're like full adults, but that's just how long they live. Right. Now, Kes begins this episode, and she's old. Like, she's, super old. And then she starts going back in time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like, so that episode itself was good because it set up notion for another episode. Now, that episode was deemed something the year from hell. And she was going back in time. And then she got to this time period where Voyager was in such a hot mess, almost half destroyed. Captain was dead, all this stuff, right? And then she realized that she could go back to a certain point in time to find out what happened. Once she found that out, there was this missile that was using a time variance, and they needed to find the time frequency. So she got the time frequency. And on her way going back, she met the captain. It's like, look, 5 years or 2 years from now, you're going to meet these guys. This is the time frequency. Just, and, you can modulate your shields this way. I spoke with Tuvok. He can cross-check it, blah, 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 right? And then she does her own arc through that, and that makes sense. And that was the end of that episode. But I was fine with it. I was like, you know what? That is going to come back later. It's going to come back. It has to. Then the year from hell comes back. It's a two-episode arc. they meet the species that has that weapon that uses time variance. Granted, because she went back in time, that also changed a lot of things also. But that species was not as powerful. But still, your databank should have said, hey, wait, that's the species that Kes told us about. Let's just make sure our shields are ready for these guys. They totally dismiss the whole thing completely. And they go through the same rubbish until, what's her name, 7 or 9 finds a way to, they find a way, to disrupt the whole thing. And I'm going, what did Kes travel back in time for in the first place?
Well, and you have issues with causality because you have so many different moving parts in Voyager where you've got faster than warp speed travel. You've got the Borg introducing trans-warp drive conduits. You've got what's the species, the alien species that's basically a bigger threat than the Borg?
Species 82174, I think.
Something like that, right? It's just species numbers. All right, cool. And I'll always be upset with Voyager for sort of defanging the Borg, making the Borg not as scary a villain as they were in Next Gen. But and then once you start introducing time travel, basically everything's moot at that point. Everything is up for grabs. Causality doesn't really matter. Continuity doesn't really matter. Canon doesn't really matter. And look at J.J. Abrams' Star Trek. It just doesn't matter. You can kind of just, time travel, Deus Ex Machina. We fixed it. Everything's fine. And Voyager was super guilty of introducing the last act Deus Ex Machina either through technobabble or through time travel or through magic. Sometimes we just don't understand what happened, but it solved all our problems. Yay! It's like if every episode of Next Gen had Q pop up at the end of the episode to fix everything and then just tell them, why they had messed up. It wouldn't be an interesting show, but we sort of accepted that was going to be the way of Voyager. And I think that's what killed a lot of the fun of the show for a lot of people. It wasn't an ensemble drama. They tried to make it one. It wasn't about coming together and people working together to solve problems. It was really, can we create some sort of fake drama? And then at the end, can we fix it with 2 strings of dialogue someone figures out in the last second? And that's not interesting storytelling. That's not really building on the rich history of Star Trek.
No, I definitely agree. And I think that falls on the characters themselves. So just to list the characters here, we had Captain Janeway, Commander Tuvok, who was the Vulcan security officer. Then you also had Commander Chakotay, second in command. You now had Ensign Kim, who was the science officer. Science officer, yeah. And you have Paris, who was the pilot. The Doctor, who was the Doctor.
And tell me that the Doctor doesn't have the best character arc of the entire show.
Fantastic. The best character arc of the show is the Doctor. And then your alien species, you had Neelix, and then you had Kes, and then eventually 7 of 9.
Doesn't 7 of 9 feel like a really cynical addition to the cast? I mean, no. This is going to sound kind of crappy, but no offense to Jerry Ryan and her talents as an actress, but ratings are dipping, and then all of a sudden we've got all these magazine spreads of a very attractive woman in a skin-tight bodysuit, and that just really, again, flies in the face of what I think is so great about Star Trek.
I definitely agree, but the sad thing too is that sad but good thing is that the episodes that were 7 of 9 centric and her rediscovering herself.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not, and again, that's why I'm saying I'm not throwing this on Jerry Ryan. I think she's a talented actress. I think the writers eventually figured out what to do with her character, but the addition of the character really does feel like a cynical grab for attention.
Oh yeah,
when she was initially introduced, and that to me, again, that is not Star Trek. That's not what we should be doing in the Star Trek universe.
Yeah, because I think what the problem they had was the way that cast was set up was. Lieutenant Paris was supposed to be the playboy of the whole bunch, but he never really fit that role.
No.
And I was fine with him eventually hooking up with B'Elanna, the half Klingon, who never really was half Klingon anyway. She was more Klingon than half, as far as I was concerned. The way the chief engineer. And then you had Ensign Kim, who I began to like him later on, I think just because he eventually grew up, so to speak. because he was basically almost like the captain's pet project,
Right.
you know, and then she dumped him for 7 of 9. This is really what it was.
Right.
Because it was that pet project of hers just wasn't sexy enough, wasn't selling well, like you know, something that people would care about, because he was already goody two shoes anyway. Let's put it what it was. He was hardworking, smart, just, you know, straightforward guy. And that was not a pet project that made any sense for the viewer to get attached to, so to speak. Right. So that was there. The Doctor, yes, we'll get to the Doctor, but the one character I liked that I think they shortchanged was Chakotay. Chakotay was, until the very end, like the last 3 episodes, that he started dating 7 of 9. I was like, really? Right. Now you want to do this? Now?
Right. I mean,
they give him like some useless love interests, you know, a couple episodes in. And I was like, and then 7 of 9 was, you know, doing her program testing, and she used Chakotay as a template. I was like, okay. But then they kind of just stopped it to the very last 2 episodes, and I'm like, they went on a date? Or like, where the hell did that come from? I mean,
again, it was some of the things that we discussed with Deep Space Nine when it came to the character drama aspects of it. I feel Trek has never really been on very solid footing. You know, you can look at Next Gen as the sort of the beginnings of the failure of any kind of romantic storytelling with Commander Riker and Deanna Troi.
Yeah,
that it sort of explained that they were an item. But then if there's a one-off episode where one of them's dating someone else, then that's kind of a big deal. And then it's that boyfriend or girlfriend is never heard from ever again. Like they just disappear for the next episode. And I don't feel that any Trek has done a good job.
Oh man, it really was one of those where I was watching. I'm going, what the hell is going? The only good consistent one I would say
is Paris and
Paris and B'Elanna, yes, but actually Ensign Kim, the fact that he just fell in love too quickly.
Oh right, the opposite of that. Yeah.
Was I actually enjoyed that, because he was like, he fell in love with a dead girl, a Borg.
Right. It's great. It's great to know that in the 24th century that dudes like Harry Kim are still getting friend zoned something fierce.
So that I liked. I was like, all right, this consistently Kim, and even though it should change at some point, I was fine with that for him. And like I said, B'Elanna and Paris, that kind of stood well enough. But the Doctor, going back to that character, was literally, like I said, I think he was the best character in the show, just in terms of story arc, and the fact that, you remember when he first was activated, he was so snarky. And, you know, he just didn't feel like he had any bedside manners, to the point where he went to the alien planet and he was a star and signed autographs, and he was like, and then he got shafted by the people there because they're like, yeah, we can build a better version of you now. So never mind, you know. And, you know, he went through those paces, and he started imagining where he wanted to become a captain of a starship, and got command controls, and he made those holographic daydreams, you know. So like, I enjoyed his arc because he did so many different things. And, you know, that was a very Star Trek moment of saying that, you know, you can achieve anything that's possible. You know, you just have to put your mind to it. It's one of those things that you get from Star Trek. And
you just really get the sense that the writers just liked his character. Robert Picardo is an amazing performer, and he did such a fantastic job bringing this character to life in a way that walked us away from, because, you know, like, you feel like Commander Data in Next Gen is very much the Spock of the Next Generation world. You know, they're very similar. They're sort of created in very similar ways, and it takes a long time for Data to sort of
evolve
and depart from sort of our notion of what a Vulcan is, and to become something new. And Robert Picardo, I think, did such a great job in the very beginning of the show of introducing this artificial life form, giving him a very unique perspective. It was a very unique character, and I think the writers just took to that in giving that character fun things to do. And when it became too much of a limitation, the writers went out of their way to, like, well, what if we gave him like the holographic transmitter, the space jargon, now he can leave the ship. Hooray.
Well, at least it came from the 29th century, so I can sort of live with that one.
Right. No. But I mean, it's necessary because the writers were so. I think the writers were so enamored with the character that they wanted to give the character other things to do. So it made sense to sort of betray the rules of the original of the beginning of the show with, again, another batch of tech jargony gobbledygook. But they end up with a character that can now do more things. So it's better for the show. But I just think it's funny that I don't know that any other character was handled with as much grace. I think Paris is close. I think Paris and B'Elanna's storyline is about as close as we'll get. But Kim is in exactly the same place at the end of the show as he is in the beginning. And I feel bad for that actor because they never gave him anything that particularly interesting to do.
You know, when I knew
his character to any great degree.
I agree. You know, when I knew he was going to be stuck was when they started showing them in their Captain Proton holographic novel they participated in, and he always played Proton's sidekick.
Yeah,
and he mentioned that once, and I was like, yeah, they're not writing his character in any form or fashion. The only one episode was when they both made it to Earth, and he was trying to find his way to he and what's his name, Chakotay, made it back to Earth, but the rest of the crew died. So he was trying to time travel back to fix that era, and that was the only story where you could see him grow because he was older and he was really pissed at himself.
And that's the one of the main storylines that sticks out over 7 seasons of television.
Yeah.
And Next Gen doesn't have that problem. Deep Space Nine doesn't have that problem. Even Enterprise, to a degree, does not have that problem where you feel like a couple characters are just totally left out in the cold.
Exactly.
Where there just wasn't anything for them to do.
Another one is Tuvok. I actually like Tuvok. I think he was kept too Vulcan to a certain degree, and then once in a while he had those Pumfar moments that you just threw him in just to show you that
we got to do something.
Exactly. And I'm like, oh man, you really mistreating this character, because one of the aspects I think they didn't show was the relationship between he and the captain.
Yes.
They were supposed to be best friends, or at least, very well respected. And we know the captain was not going to have a love interest in this. She already made it clear, like, I cannot, because, somebody has to stay above the fray here with this, in this whole ship. And we definitely knew Tuvok was not going to anyway. Right. So even if it was a couple episodes where they went through a holographic program or something, but seeing that relationship of where it actually started from, that she cared about Tuvok so much, and he vice versa, would have been nice to see. But all we just got was we've been friends for 23 years, and Tuvok, you're 120, that kind of thing. And I'm just like, okay. I mean, I know the dude's old, but
that's that, and that was a big problem. That their entire relationship is basically exposition.
Yeah.
Their relationship has never really developed. I mean, I shouldn't say never really, but it's very poorly developed over the course of 7 seasons of television, when most of their interactions are like, hey, do you remember that time when we weren't stuck out in the middle of the Delta Quadrant and we did that thing and it was interesting? And yes, I remember that. That was good times too. Their relationship never really felt like it grew much beyond that until we get to the last episodes, when all of a sudden Janeway is motivated to act to
because Tuvok is sick or something. Yeah, I know it was one of the. I mean, she had a better relationship on the show with Chakotay, where they always had dinner together.
Right. Well, and that there was a little bit more interesting back and forth in that Chakotay would challenge her occasionally, but that actually kind of goes away later in the show too, where it was really supposed to be this notion of the Maquis on the show and the Federation on the show were supposed to be at more odds with each other. And by the 3rd season, everyone's kind of fine. No, everyone's cool.
See, I'm fine with that though. But what I didn't like I would have preferred if the first season focused on Maquis Federation relationships and trying to find the other was it Gatekeeper or the alien that brought them over?
Right.
And that should have been the first season, because by the 3rd season, by the 2nd season, they already almost quelled it. And then a random episode in the 4th season some marquee mind trick came back. I was like, I don't even want to hear anything about this crap. Just take it away. You know what I mean? Like, I've forgotten about it completely.
Right. Well, that's just it, is that none of it's reinforced.
Yeah.
The relationship between characters is not reinforced. The conflict between characters is not reinforced. And things are introduced whenever the showrunners feel like they need to do something to impress us.
Yeah, sorry.
Ratings are lagging. Let's bring in a really attractive blonde and say that she was a Borg. Ratings are lagging, so now we're gonna come up with a villain even worse than the Borg. Nothing is actually built in a way that it feels like it was organically constructed for that universe. It's all, here's a big surprise, and then they'll talk their way out of it with some gobbledygook techno babble.
Oh yeah, no. It's one of those where I'm like, I think the relationship with how they were doing the structure just didn't make any sense. That episode I mentioned with the marquee time, mental, whatever, telepathy episode was season 5, almost the end of season 5. Sorry, not season 4. So, and the whole marquee thing was squashed by end of season 2, maybe season 3. So I'm going, why do we have this here? This doesn't make any sense. And then one of the things that I didn't like was how they just left Neelix. I mean, granted he found more Talaxians in his people, but Neelix had become a slightly funny, integral part of the crew.
Yeah.
And I understand, yes, he would have found his people and he would want to stay, but that story arc should have been just a little longer for me to go, man, Neelix is leaving, that makes sense, but I guess he wasn't going to make it to the Alpha Quadrant with, with the crew, which is fine. Right. But it just felt kind of, again, one episode.
Well, and you almost have to wonder, was that really what the writers intended? Was there some outside conflict with the actor playing Neelix? Did he book another job or get another gig? Like those types of things are really hard to, I mean, they're really easy to pick apart, but they're also really hard to analyze, not knowing what the behind the scenes story was.
Now, the quick question though, was there a writer's strike throughout the show? At any point?
I don't know.
One of my buddies, I was telling him I was watching these, he's like, I didn't like it. It must have been a writer's strike. I'm like, maybe. He's
so,
like,
I mean,
some of the episodes were terrible.
It actually does bring up one of so all of the, we can go through every season individually or whatever, but how did you feel about the actual wrap to Voyager, the end of the series?
Oh, it was terrible.
Really? You didn't enjoy their solution for ending the show?
No, again, the solution is fine. There is, it made sense that the Borg will have some way to reach around the galaxy and be so dominant and keep it hidden, because the Borg, I mean, the way they made the Borg in Voyager was like, yeah, they're very strong, but there are a lot of species that can at least hold them back in terms of firepower, which is fine with me. So having that portal and have it hidden, it's no problem. It's just the way that episode was. It was an hour 45-minute episode. Yeah, that should have been a 3-episode arc to end the show.
I think the entire thing could have been a season. The entire wrap of the show could have been a season to really set the stage in the Delta Quadrant for what was happening, maybe throw in a couple weird clues of things that weren't quite right. Piece of technology they don't understand, which someone hypothesizes is from the future. And then you get into like the last 4 episodes where then strange things start occurring. And then you could even backtrack and show future Janeway's machinations, like all of the things that she influenced throughout the season. But that would have required the show writers to say, this is the plan. And I don't think they ever had a plan. I think they had sort of this is how we want to end it. So whenever we're not going to get greenlit for another season, we'll just slap these 2 episodes on to the end of a season and we'll call it a day.
Yeah, which is why I said a 3, maximum 4 would have been great, because you still have enough time to shoot that way instead of instead of you doing a whole season, which I understand they couldn't do. The thing I didn't like was the fact that future Janeway goes back. We saw now that her feelings for Tuvok, so sad that he's sick. The fact that 7 of 9, her other baby child, she had 2 children on the show. Ensign Kim, who was alive and well. Remember, she had to make sure Kim got back to his folks. He's alive and well. Is now a captain. And then 7 of 9 died because Chakotay died. All that stuff in there together. And so she wanted to rectify things. So I get that part. What I didn't enjoy was the lack of techno mumbo jumbo, which I've hated before, but she comes in with this ship, like her little shuttle was solid. I mean, like armor plating, some new type of proton torpedoes, which was not developed by the Federation, was developed by them, the extra 16 years that went through Delta Quadrant. So I'm like, I would have loved to at least understand some of that. At least because you're bringing something different. It's the same way when they brought in the mobile emitter and said, oh no, this is a mobile emitter. It's almost like it's a pocket transmitter for you. And we can just always download you in here and update. And you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. This is like, oh, we have an armor plate and nothing can touch it. I'm like, armor? I mean, what kind of material is the armor plating on?
Right.
I mean, like.
Oh, and also because the Federation typically doesn't design weapons of war to that degree.
Exactly. They don't. So what's the armor on the plating and what kind of torpedoes did you create? And then you now have sensory stuff that the Doctor created. I was like, wow. I mean, like, fill me in.
Right.
And it's just like, dump, just run with it. And I understand, like, her presenting it that way, Future Janeway, because her mindset is like, look, I don't have time for this shit. Just go home, and make it there. Right. And then it took me a second, and I was like, why is she wasting her time trying to convince them that they can't destroy it when she can destroy it herself? Because it doesn't matter anyway. As long as her younger self gets there, she's still going to be alive.
Right.
Unless she had some dreams of her living the rest of her old life. I mean, I just didn't even get that. I'm like, anytime you have a future self coming back to save a younger self, the future self knows that as long as that one is safe, some existence of me will still be around.
Right. Yeah.
So I didn't like the way it ended there. And then everyone just looked super old. When they did like the future tense, they showed Harry Kim, right? So Harry Kim just finished the academy at 20 something. And then he spent 7 years in the Delta Quadrant. Mm-hmm. And then we found out that it was 26 years later when they moved to the future. So which would only make Harry Kim maybe 50,
which in this society, it's not uncommon for humans to live to be like 150.
Yeah, exactly. So why does he look like he's that old? And Tuvok,
well, who is Vulcan, who should be able to live like 400 years.
Yeah, Tuvok, who at this point is like almost 200, looks fresh and young, even though he's crazy.
No, but I mean, I think this is another thing that this is another Trek trope that I think is really funny. That they always seem to get actors' ages wrong. So there's the episode of Next Gen where Picard is living like an entire lifetime in this alien probe software. And at the end of it, he just looks so ancient. But you kind of follow like what we think the age of that actor would have, what the age of that individual would have been, is the age that Patrick Stewart is now. And he doesn't look anything like that. He doesn't look all melted and old and withered and blah. He looks not too much, different than what he did 30 years ago. So it's just even funnier that they would get Kim's age so wrong.
Yeah, I know. I was like, wow.
Harry Kim's going to look like when he's 45. I don't know. Like, that's really old. So, like, make him look like he's almost dead.
Yeah, I was like, wait, Harry Kim's a captain. And the way captain schemes work in Star Trek is, especially since he just came back from the Delta Quadrant, all those guys got promoted to captain, at least close. Literally. I mean, because we knew that she was going to be an admiral like that. Because they're like, look, you're not going anywhere. You've already done the longest mission ever. Never mind. Fine. You're an admiral. All right, fine, Kim. I know you're eager. Rest for a year, but Cap will give you a ship. That kind of thing. So I wasn't expecting them to just look like they were all decrepit and old. And like, Paris looks so old. I was like, oh man, what happened to you? So it was one of those things where like, I didn't like the age, changes there. And it just should have been a longer ending. I expected like 3 episodes because the episode before the end was an episode centered about the Doctor and the captain, him trying to save the captain from an enemy that they already had dealt with a long time ago that didn't have technology to capture them. So I didn't even get that one either. So I think they got the letter or email or whatever saying season needs to end. So they just had to chop some things together and say, let's record this.
Totally.
You know,
and I think it shows. I actually kind of liked so my experience with Voyager. I stopped watching Voyager when it was being broadcast. It's it was the show that also set the stage where I didn't watch Enterprise in real time either. I waited until the entire thing was done, until I went back and watched all of the seasons put together. And so for me, my experiences with Voyager, I did go back and eventually watch every episode of Voyager and didn't really particularly enjoy it. But I kind of feel like you could watch the first episode, the pilot of Voyager, and then the last 2 episodes, or just the one long end of Voyager, and pretty much have the whole storyline. Like that's really the whole gig. Everything that happens in between kind of doesn't matter as much, because at some point Janeway just arbitrarily decides, well, I'm going to go into the past and just solve their problem. So why did she wait so long? You know, she could have gone back to when 7 of 9 was brought on the ship, if you really care about 7 of 9, and saved them all then. And why does she make an arbitrary decision that we have to wait to this point to save the ship? It's kind of like in Terminator Genesis. Well, we've got to stop Genesis. We better go forward in time to the day before Genesis is launched, as opposed to like, why don't we go like 10 years in the past and destroy all of the stuff that will eventually become Genesis, and then we won't have to worry about it, you know? But no, it's more dramatic if we wait until the last possible second to enact time travel. It's time travel. You can go anywhere, when. You know, she could have gone to the Badlands to stop Janeway from even getting sucked into the Delta Quadrant if that had been an issue. So again, it's a poorly executed Deus Ex Machina, but I at least appreciate that they paid some attention to Trek favorites, the Borg, and that they at least tried to give motivations which made sense for why these characters were doing the things they were. But if you're going to violate the Prime Directive, I mean, violate the Prime Directive. Just do it. Just go for it.
The Prime Directive is also kind of foolish sometimes.
Oh, it totally is. I mean, it's you create a rule like the Prime Directive for the same reason that you create like the laws of robotics from Isaac Asimov stories. It's that you by actually putting a rule in place, you have more dramatic license for how do you continue using that rule, or how do you defy that rule, or how do you bend that rule without really breaking it. You have more storytelling options out of it, but it's become sort of a joke of a crutch in the Star Trek universe also. Yeah.
Oh my God. The Prime Directive is one of those where I'm like, really? Come on, just get out of here. And the one thing, just before we wrap up, the one thing about Voyager that even 7 of 9 stated so many times, she was like, you people stop way too much for somebody trying to get back home.
Right.
I mean, every hail, every call. I mean, I understand you're going this way. I'm going north. Someone's hailing me, maybe northwest. Okay, just close to my direction. Okay, fine. We'll stop by. Somebody's hailing me south, like 10,000 light years behind me.
Right. Better go investigate.
I'm like, really? No.
Oh, but we're adventurers. We adventure and we explore, and we're exploring adventurers.
I mean, I understand her mindset is like, look, we're going to get back at some point. We should map this area so that we can leave, which is cool.
Admirable.
You know, and that's why you develop the astrometric lab for super long range sensors. You know, scan, put in database, keep moving.
But that makes way too much sense. You can't really build a show out of that.
No. I mean, I think at some point you need to just cut back some of those things. You know, you do. It's just that the amount of races that were, is it xenophobic or ethnocentric? Where just there's a lot of those in the Delta.
A lot.
I don't know. Was that because of the Borg, or it doesn't matter because the Borg would just come in and assimilate you anyway.
Well, and then also that they always tried to sort of tease at what could be like the Delta Quadrant version of something like the Klingon Empire or the Federation or the Romulan Empire. But
it was not.
They're just way less organized. In the Delta
God, yeah, they are just unorganized individuals over there. Super unorganized. I mean, these I also think the Delta Quadrant is larger than the Alpha in terms of space.
You think so? I think it's just a quadrant. I think it's just 1/4 of the galaxy as we know it.
Maybe. All I know is that there were so many different empires, and I have not explained it. Just so many different people with different.
Well, but I think again, if there were any notion of consistency, we wouldn't have had so many different empires and people and things. If you'd had like a Dominion, because Deep Space Nine, there weren't tons of different organizations. There was the Dominion.
Yeah.
So Dominion and the Federation, and there's the Showdown, and you can incorporate the Cardassians and the Klingons, but that was the main conflict. And the fact that there wasn't anything like that in the Delta Quadrant, except for kind of the Borg, but not really,
and the Kazons initially, which
but they
guys were even ragtag too. And ragtag bunch of individuals.
They weren't really a federation. They were just one species who they were kind of being positioned to be the baddies of this show, and they weren't very interesting. Also, I think their makeup design was kind of terrible. But yeah, it's just silly and sad that they couldn't pull it together to really reinforce that.
Did you notice the reuse of actors from other Star Treks?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I think it's hysterical when you see Tuvok pop up in Next Gen. There's the episode where they're like decontaminating the Enterprise, but it's basically Die Hard, where Captain Picard gets stuck on the Enterprise as they're doing this decontamination scan, which obliterates all biological matter. So if you get stuck in the scan, you're going to be obliterated. But Tuvok, the actor who plays Tuvok, it's not the character Tuvok, but the actor who plays Tuvok is one of these evil villains that are trying to steal something from the warp core of the Enterprise, and Picard has to stop all of these villains in sort of like Die Hard kind of way. It's hysterical.
Yeah. Oh no. Oh, speaking of which, before we finish, Tuvok, I think the best episode was I can't remember what happened to him, but he lost his sense of control and became very childish and wanted to have fun, and he hung out with Neelix for the whole episode, where he was cooking. Tuvok was making pastries and all these different things. And at the end, the doctor's like, "Well, I figured out a way to make sure your engrams or whatever, your memory engrams don't disappear or what have you." And Tuvok was like, "No, I don't want to be that old guy. He's boring. I mean, it's not fun." And they're like, but he was, and Neelix was trying. And this, I remember the episode because at the very beginning of the episode, Neelix always thought that Tuvok just didn't respect him,
right,
at all. And so he got to hang out with the cool version of Tuvok. And at the end of the episode, Tuvok kind of acknowledged him in his own Vulcan way. It was like, it's like, maybe Wednesdays I will make this one pastry, but not super sweet type of thing. And for Neelix, I was like, that is just fine. I would take that.
Right.
And they kind of alluded that to when Neelix left, because he was the last person to greet Neelix, and he gave him a greeting in his own native language.
Right.
Was.
So, sorry, I just snapped. One thing that I did want to bring up, it's one of my favorite pieces of trivia about Voyager, is the actor who plays Paris was in an episode of Next Generation. It's the episode where Wesley Crusher's at Starfleet Academy, and one of their classmates dies because of a ship maneuver that they're learning how to pilot these ships. And the original idea for Tom Paris was to bring back the character from that episode. But while they brought back the actor, they didn't want to bring back the character because they would have had to have paid the writer from the Next Generation episode, the writer who wrote that episode, a royalty on every appearance of that character
Which is
in Voyager. So they basically just created the same character, gave him a slightly different backstory, and gave him a different name so they could reuse the actor that they had initially intended to have be a core part of Voyager, which is hysterical.
wow. That is just too much. All right, it's interesting. Good to know. Good to know. All right, so that's it, guys. I don't hate Voyager, but there are a lot of things that that annoy.
Well, I mean, that's the grade. Is if you're a fan of Star Trek, you have to watch it. It's a part of the Trek canon. It's a part of the Trek universe. But I think for most of us, it's definitely. I've not met anyone who's well versed on Trek who says Voyager is their absolute favorite show. I just don't know that person really exists, or I would.
Oh, it does. It does. Alex Anderton says I won't be able to watch it live, unfortunately, but I can say. I can say I'm a huge Star Trek fan. That Voyager was amazing. I have all 7 seasons. I hope I can watch this on repeat. Give us your thoughts when you watch this, man. I know yeah.
Right. And so maybe I'm being too harsh, and maybe someone who grew up when Voyager was the new show on TV, maybe that person is going to be a little bit more inclined to dig on Voyager. But when you look at the entire canon of Star Trek, every property, every movie, the animated series, I can't say that I think Voyager was treated with as much care, drama, and attention to detail and storytelling as Deep Space Nine or the original series or Next Gen.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Quick questions. What do you think of 7 and 9? I think we addressed that. She was a necessary character to add. And Muffle Bluff says
mumble fluff.
Mumble. That's him. Why is he? Never mind. Moto X style too big. Just any thought? Yeah.
I mean, I get cranky about phablets. I want to see another. Where's my? Oh, here it is. I want to see another 5-inch screen Moto X. I think this is a beautifully designed phone.
Well, they have a 5-inch screen Moto X. It's just not coming to US.
Yeah, I know. Well, but then also it's not really. Isn't the smaller one going to be 5.5? I mean Premiere. Like a Premiere Moto X. What's that?
5.2. Style is 5.7. The Moto X Play is 5.2, and then the Moto G.
No, I thought Moto X Play was 5.5.
You could be right.
I'm pretty sure it's 5.5. I think they've walked away from a 5 or a 5.2, which is why.
I think maybe you're right. The Moto G is the 5.
Moto G is the smaller one. Yeah. But I mean, for as much as I appreciate what Motorola's been doing at the low end, I want a flagship that's not bigger, or not the same size as a G4.
You're absolutely right. I am the complete opposite. I like my phones big, just like in Texas. So right. Cool.
Well, I don't mind a phablet, but now we've got so many little variations in between flagship and phablet. Sure. Like I think LG needs a proper phablet. Stop trying to make all phones the same build, general design, and form factor, and give us a Flex 3, which returns us to a 6-inch screen. Make it a clear, distinguished phone series from your flagship phone, because I think it's too confusing for people to be looking at. Well, this one's 5.5 inches and this one's 5.5 inches, but this one has more of a curve to the screen, and this one's supposedly the flagship, which is different than the one with the curve to the screen. I don't think that's a good play. But anyway, for Motorola, I don't think that it's too big. In fact, I'm glad that they didn't just recycle the Nexus 6 hardware.
Yeah,
I'm glad that they actually are doing something unique for Motorola and Lenovo. So I'll be curious to play with it. I think it'll be an interesting competitor against what we'll see from the Note 5, especially since Samsung can't get their multitasking shit together.
Yeah. I think in terms of beating out, it would be an interesting competitor. I think Samsung will still win the argument, but I think where it's going to win is what it did on Tuesday to what we heard on Monday.
Yeah.
Monday was 1+2. People were happy. I wasn't so happy with what I saw. And then Tuesday, I was like, get out of here. Yeah. That was my own reaction. I was like, thank you, Motorola. I know, granted, the 16 gigabyte starts at $399, but I'll take it over no NFC. Thank you.
Well, and also, I mean, like, let's be clear here. When you're looking at a company like OnePlus the OnePlus company, they don't have a very clear track record of delivering product with a high QA, with good support, with build quality consistency.
Yeah.
And you know, their software is a little all over the place. It's a great phone for tinkerers, but to sit here and try and claim that it's a flagship killer or that it's a no compromises device is ludicrous, especially when you can see a 2014 Moto X is probably still going to spank the crap out of most of what we'll see from the OnePlus 2, and Motorola is putting out phones $100 cheaper, handily competing with what we'll see on board from the OnePlus 2. It just further reinforces the point that smartphones are plateauing, that they're not as exciting as they were a couple of years ago, that we really need to be focused as the gadget tech elite, all of the people that watch our broadcasts and stuff, on what does the post-smartphone world look like, and what features and services and pieces of hardware are we going to get excited about next, because it's not going to keep being the smartphone.
You're very right. So I have to think about what next to watch. Some people have said I should watch Babylon 5, which I haven't, or I go back and rewatch Cylon. Sorry,
Battlestar Galactica. So if you've already watched Battlestar Galactica, and now that you've gone through this Star Trek experiment, I think you should try and tackle Babylon 5, because it's cheesier, it's hokier, but it predates every single great consistent storyline TV show by a couple years. Okay. So they had a very clear plan of where they wanted. J. Michael Straczynski had a very clear plan on where he wanted that show to go. It gets interrupted in the 3rd and 4th seasons because of a writer's strike. Or at least I think it was because of a writer's strike. It might have been because of some other strike. But I still think it holds to the core identity of the show far better than a number of other science fiction properties out there. You just have to get over some of the cheeseball factor at the very beginning, because there's a lot of cornball, and eventually the show finds a niche. It finds its footing, finds a niche where they're telling some very mature science fiction, not sci-fi, but science fiction drama storylines. Okay. And I think if you didn't have Babylon 5, you never would have gotten Battlestar Galactica.
All right, cool. Then Babylon 5 it is. So
damn.
Thank you very much, guys, for watching. And also, we threw in some tech there as you expected. I got in my Star Trek shirt. I
wore a red shirt. I couldn't find. I have my old school logo shirt, and I couldn't find it for the.
I was gonna get that sweater though. we all.
Yeah,
I was like,
great.
It's too hot for that anyway right now, so maybe Christmas I might do.
But what we're talking, there's a great Star Trek cardigan, so you can look like, if Mr. Rogers were a Starfleet officer.
Yes.
You could do that.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you very much for joining, Juan. I appreciate.
Of course.
Talking some Trek with you. Thanks, guys, for watching. Any questions, leave them down below. We will try and answer. Definitely check out both channels, Mr. Juan Bagnell at Some Gadget Guy on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Periscope, Snapchat, which I am on now. You can check with me out there also on everything else. It's Booredatwork. So it's Thunder E saying thank you and always enjoy your entertainment.
Bam.